Scafalunit? Really? Brandon Miller, injured indefinitely. Don't know how long he's going to be out. Brandon, are you going to be out for a while? Yeah, that's what I thought. All right, we talk about another injury coming up next. Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Okay.
In a minute, cuz we live.
All right, let me get Brandon back situated, the bobblehead. It's Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your podcast, and that does include YouTube. I'm Walker Mail, the man talking to a Brandon Miller bobblehead in the cold open, asking him about his scapholunate injury, because we should be able to take the MCAT now by how many medical terms we know with this Hornets team over the last 3 years. I feel like we do a pretty decent job. But yes, I was just talking to a Brandon Miller bobblehead, the very Brandon Miller bobblehead the Hornets are going to be handing out to the first few thousands of people in attendance to today's MLK Day, LAK Day game against the Mavericks, tipping at 12 p.m. But of course, the bobblehead is going to represent a player that's not going to be suiting up. Doug Branson also on the pod with me. Find him on everyhornetsboxscore.com. Also host of Locked On NBA. Yeah, this was a brutal injury that the Hornets and Brandon Miller suffered. It sucks. It all sucks.
Yeah, any laughing that you hear on this show is not laughing at Brandon Miller. It's a horrible situation, unfortunate for the young man. It's a painful laugh. It is laughing through the pain. It is laughing because
we're
of the
freaking delirious.
pain.
Yeah, we're
because
hysterical.
like at this point, how many injuries like this can we take? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. We're still here. We're still broadcasting every day, so we haven't reached the limit yet.
All right, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Now's the perfect time to join. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, no need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Plus, we do have a Locked On Hornets newsletter introducing the daily and the new Locked On Hornets newsletter. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free right now. LockedOnDaily.com. LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Hornets newsletter. Yeah, so this news broke just really, what, Doug? Like 5 minutes on that Hornets PR account that usually just brings a bunch of bad news. This broke about 5 minutes after the Hornets win over the Bulls over the weekend, 125-123. It was a close one. I would love to be leading the show with that victory, talking about Mark's big game, but instead we're talking about Brandon, who was listed as questionable coming into this. We did not know the severity of the injury. The Hornets did not release it again, like I said, until a couple of minutes after they won. Then they gave us a Friday news dump. So just to be official, the Hornets said Friday that second-year forward Brandon Miller will be out indefinitely due to a torn scapholunate ligament in his right wrist. Miller, the number 2 overall pick in the 23 NBA draft, was held out of the Hornets' 125-123 win over Chicago due to what the team initially called a wrist sprain. But again, he's out indefinitely. Doug, I'll let you take the floor from here, but it looks like indefinitely isn't going to be one of these indefinitely designations where he comes back maybe in a couple of weeks. You do the Googling on this injury, you do the research of other players that have suffered this injury. Brandon's going to be out for quite some time.
So NBA injury expert Jeff Stotts weighed in on Twitter. He said the scapholunate ligament is the most frequently sprained carpal ligament. The majority of NBA players that have torn the ligament have ultimately needed surgery, including Jaylen Brown and Bradley Beal. Surgery is accompanied by a lengthy recovery, and everything that I've read suggests that if surgery is the route that they take with Brandon Miller, it's going to be a minimum 6-month timetable for return, which is a long time, but at the same time, there is a chance that he could be ready for training camp in September for the next season. That's not out of the question. Had this happened in March or in April or in the offseason, then I think his availability for the next season would be in question. But yeah, obviously This is a major injury. I would note, too, on the Bradley Beal situation, that happened in 2022. He came back, and I think he shot 30% from three in that injury season, and then he came back and shot 36% the next season and 40+% the season after that. So, with a wrist injury, I think, particularly with a guy who's shooting a lot like Brandon, that's what you're worried about. Stiffness, loss of range in motion. Is that going to affect his ability to shoot the basketball for years to come? And there's some evidence with Jaylen Brown and Bradley Beal that hasn't been the case. So hopefully it won't be with Brandon either.
Yeah, so, okay, we just did a guide on how to watch the Hornets the last episode. And the thing that I told you, the one way to watch this team was going to be to watch LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller on the court at the same time. Because if you are building around these two pillars of the organization, I would say these are the two foundational pieces that you have first and foremost. Core four, we've made fun of that quite a bit because we don't know who the fourth is in that scenario. We could try to make this a trio, especially with the way that Mark has played the last couple of games. But really, it comes down to LaMelo 1, Brandon 2. Like, we can actually do this in order. We can make a totem pole where LaMelo is at the top and Brandon is second in terms of how valuable they are to the franchise. So to watch LaMelo and Brandon on the court at the same time, that matters a ton. Like, those guys getting as many reps as possible, that matters a lot. So you can evaluate what your dynamic duo might be, whatever nickname you want to give them. But those two play in the backcourt. It's actually a couple of positions they play, Doug, where it's probably a little harder to figure out how to play with one another rather than just a big and a center. A lot of pick and roll, right? It's the pick and pop. There's not as much nuance as I know there is, right? But there's not as much compared to guards playing alongside one another. Like, how many pick and rolls do you want to do with Brandon Miller and LaMelo? The inverted stuff, the ball handling, the usage between both of them. Like, there's a lot of stuff to figure out between both of these guys, and it doesn't seem that we're going to get many reps between both of them on the floor, which is why this one hurts. Again, not trying to play doomsday scenario here, but this one does hurt a little more than other injuries that the team could have suffered for sure. And maybe even more so than people realize because of the position that Brandon plays along with your point guard in LaMelo.
And you just went to the higher level of this, which is the relationship between Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball and the rest of his teammates, which is something that I think the team wanted to evaluate, not just with Brandon, but LaMelo and Mark. And injuries have gotten in the way of a lot of that ability to evaluate, and it continues to here. But that's kind of the higher level. Just on an individual player level, this injury stinks because it's on his ball-dominant hand, his right wrist. And so what's the one thing that we've been pointing towards Brandon Miller needing to get better at in order to achieve what we all thought he would be able to achieve, or what we still think he's able to achieve in the NBA, and that's ball handling. And so, yes, he's going to be able to run around during his rehab and stay fit, and that's great. But there are things that he's not going to be able to do: shoot and handle the basketball while he recovers from this, if surgery is indeed the way to go. And we don't know the severity of the tear. Like, that's the thing. And honestly, like, I tried to look for the point in the game and in the Utah game in which he injured it, and I couldn't find it. So I don't know if it's a situation where maybe he was feeling some pain after the game and they went and did the MRI and looked at it and were like, oh, there it was. But it may have been a situation where it's been that way for a little bit and they just found it. It's really tough to say. I recall that when LaMelo fractured his wrist, he thought he had just sprained it. Wrist injuries seem to be weird where, like, you don't immediately think, oh, man, something terrible has happened here until they get it under the MRI and say, yep, we know exactly what's going on there and we need to do surgery. So this is bad on an individual level, and that, a lot of the things that he was going to continue to work on this season and in the offseason, I mean, that's going to have to just take a back seat to rehabbing and getting that wrist healthy again.
Yeah, and look, I know here I am playing the doomsday scenario, even if I don't want to. It doesn't mean that he can't come back and be an all-star. Jaylen Brown is a prime example of somebody that suffered this injury and then comes back and is still a really good basketball player. So it doesn't mean that he can't do that, but we are discussing just how hard I would imagine the rehabilitation is, especially with that being on his right wrist, his shooting wrist, and painting out the scenario between him and LaMelo, and even just Brandon and Mark too, right? Like, Brandon playing alongside some of the other guys that you hope to make it to the next level, whatever that iteration of this team looks like. It all is unfortunate, but it does not mean Brandon can't come back and become still a hopeful all-star after seeing the potential he gave us certainly his rookie year.
No, I mean, LaMelo is the prime example. I mean, fractured wrist, and yes, he's still, I think this is going to be potentially a long-term thing for Brandon Miller. And I was doing some reading on Bradley Beal's injury, and Bullets Forever, an SB Nation blog, did an interview with a doctor at the time that specialized in these kind of injuries. And there can be complications from the surgery, stiffness, loss of range of motion. Sometimes the injury or the surgery undoes itself, and they have to go back in a couple of years later and refix it. Like, there are things that could follow Brandon Miller, and yet we have seen examples, as you just said, Jaylen Brown, Bradley Beal, of being able to recover and even play better post-surgery. So I'm not in a doomsday scenario. I'm in a realistic place. Where I am with this team, though, is that this is the danger of being in the second inning of a 9-inning ball game, which is something we've heard from the ownership group, of doing this sort of patient, sustainable approach, particularly with this team and the injury history, is that, you work through the draft and you try to develop guys, and these kinds of things that can happen and they set you back. And so, I don't know if this is going to change how they operate over the next few years. But yeah, I mean, these are always the dangers when you're like, all right, we're going to slowly develop this team, slowly become a contender. It's like, yeah, well, you're one or two major injuries from having a major setback in trying to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish.
We'll continue coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere!
Maybe give some final observations, what it means with this Brandon Miller injury. We will recap Charlotte and Chicago. Nick Richards has a very nice debut with the Phoenix Suns. What does that mean to us as Hornets fans? We'll get to all of that in just a moment here on Locked On Hornets. Before we do, I want to tell you this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Basketball season is heating up, and there's no better way to get real money action while watching your favorite NBA stars than with PrizePicks. Whether you're a diehard fan or just love some friendly competition, PrizePicks makes it fun and easy to turn your basketball knowledge into cash. Here's how it works. You can pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Think LeBron's going to drop 30? Maybe Luka is getting more than 8 assists. PrizePicks lets you make your predictions and put your money where your mouth is in just 60 seconds. That's it. Now's the perfect time to join. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 off instantly. You should get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. More Locked On Hornets ahead. All right, any other final observations here, or maybe do we alter the how-to guide now after we told fans how to watch the Hornets? Brandon Miller was a specific part of that. How do you watch this team now? Like, what? Yeah, that's my question. What does that do? How does that change when we're supposed to watch LaMelo and Brandon? Like, now what are we watching because of Brandon's injury? Does that put more pressure on Nick Smith Jr. coming in? Does that put more pressure when Trey Mann comes back, Doug? Are we trying to see how LaMelo and Trey play on the court together at some, like, how does this alter meaningful stuff with this organization?
Yeah, if Trey Mann ever gets over this disc irritation issue in his back, that would be something very interesting to watch. I wonder if they just immediately put him into the starting lineup and see what that looks like. I think Nick Smith Jr., with all the rumors of him being potentially on the trade market, he gets the start in this game against Chicago, has 15 points, 5 rebounds, felt like a little bit of a showcase of like, hey guys, here's what Nick Smith Jr. can do if anyone's interested. So I think that's still the case with him. Are they going to lean on Josh Green to do more offensively? And if so, how does he perform? And how does that affect his future with the team? So I think those are all interesting storylines that now are going to be even more interesting because of the Brandon Miller injury. But I still think you watch it the same way. You watch the game within the game. You're going to watch the starting unit that still has LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges, and Mark Williams. You're going to see how those three interact. And then when they break the lineup, you're going to brace for impact on what teams are going to be able to do when you're, depending more on Tijan Salon and some other guys to get minutes. Although, interestingly, I don't know if we'll talk about this in depth at some point, but he got sent down to Greensboro. Don't know how permanent that is. If it's going to be just sort of sending them down when they have a few days off, we're gonna have to just sort of keep our eye on that. The last thing I will say is that we did get a quote from LaMelo after the win against Chicago, and he was asked about Brandon Miller, and he said, quote, "I was in the same kind of situation my rookie year or sophomore year or whatever." He's with the whole squad, so that will help a little. I remember my situation, just being around with the guys. It's tough times, though, unquote. So the thing I was laughing at is that he couldn't remember whether it was his rookie year or his sophomore year. And for the record, it was his rookie year. He played, I think, 41 games before fracturing his wrist in 2021 and missed the remainder of his rookie year. He still was able to win Rookie of the Year. But then, coming back his sophomore year, again, he's still doing it, but he's still messing with that wrist on the sideline.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's why I say there is a potential here for this to follow Brandon. But the thing that LaMelo is saying here is important, which is that Brandon is going to be able to rehab with another all-star level player with him, telling him, yeah, this is what I went through. That's important because I think when these injuries happen, particularly to a young player, it can strike at the belief like, oh, man, I was supposed to do X, Y, and Z, and now what? Am I going to be the same player? And he can go to LaMelo and they can converse about that thing. And I actually think that's super important and a super positive thing for Brandon Miller as he attacks this rehab.
All right, let's give you some Chicago takeaways. The Hornets 2 wins in a row, baby. Hornets get a win, 125-123.
Streaking!
And, yeah, baby. No Brandon Miller in this one. Obviously, this was played before we knew about the scapholunate ligament injury, and then, of course, we found that out a couple minutes after. But Nick Smith Jr. entered the starting lineup, and then 4 of the 5 starters got into double figures. And it's not like Josh Green had a goose egg game. He had 8 points, 3 of 4, did totally fine with some of the buckets he hit offensively. Seth Curry also really gave them a big boost off of the bench. 7 of 10 from the field for Seth, 15 points. But Doug, we got to start with Mark Williams. I mean, 19 points for Mark, 19 rebounds. So a 19-9 game. He had 3 assists, which he's been giving you like 3 assists. You could almost set your watch to it with all the games that he's played since coming back from injury. They've been running their offense a little bit through him and using his ability as a passer. But I just wanted to read his game log real quickly. So Mark Williams, 19-9 against Chicago, 31-13 against Utah, 24-16 against Phoenix, 9-10 against Phoenix the first time, 11-9, 18-9, 20-12 the first time they played Chicago. We can keep going, but we'll just start with that 20-point outing and the double-digit rebound game. The game log looks sick. He looked sick the last couple of games. I see in the rundown that maybe there was one thing that happened in this game that allowed you to become a true Mark fan. Now, this was the game that turns you into a Mark fan.
Well, I think just the past couple of games, he's looked more physical. He's looked more intense. Like, I mean, that's kind of an eyeball thing. I don't really have like a set of plays, but there was the one moment in the Chicago game where he really gets into Vooch's head, and then Vooch is going after the referees, and Mark walks up behind him and like signals to the ref, like, tee him up. So that was cool. I think then a Chicago Bulls fan would be quick to point out that Vooch got off for 40 in this game. And I think if we're being fair, like I think 19-19, great box score. And I thought generally Mark Williams had a good game, and all 40 of those weren't on Mark Williams. But when the opposing center scores 40, that's going to be difficult. And I think Mark's always going to have a challenge when you're talking about a center that can play at all 3 levels like Vooch can. That's going to give Mark problems. So this was not an exception, but again, it wasn't enough for the Bulls to get a win. And I think he had 5. Didn't Mark have 5 fouls? Like he was in danger of fouling out in this game.
He did have 5 fouls. Well, so I was trying to tee you up because I see in the rundown, like to give you guys a peek behind the curtain, it felt like you were about to fully embrace this man when I read. I thought
that's what I just did.
What? No, you just gave us all the caveats and all the qualifiers. Well,
That's my
Chicago,
job.
they'd point out. Fair. All right. Fair. That's fine.
I feel so much better about Mark Williams now than I did a few weeks ago. There's just no doubt about that. At the same time, I think you've got to, when a guy scored, look, if Vooch had gotten 26, I wouldn't have mentioned it. He got 40 in this game.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. I just wanted to point out, I was like, all right, man, this is going to be some funny thing where Doug leans all the way in. He has finally joined the dark side, the Mark side of everything. And it's like, well, Vooch scored 40. It's like, all right, great. We can't have nice things.
I probably wrote that down in the rundown when Vooch had 26. And then Vooch went and got 40. And I'm like, oh, boy.
This makes sense. I'm sure you did write that down real time when Mark was just going off, and then Vooch. Well, you know what happened? It's when Vooch got the tee, then he started to go crazy. That's when
17 points in the fourth quarter.
That's when he got angry. This is when Vooch started to go off, which matches with how you wrote, right? I'm sure you wrote this as soon as he got the technical, and then he goes nuclear after that. I do think there were some clutch defensive possessions against Vooch down the line where there's the foul call against Mark that he didn't agree with, but also there was a couple of times that he contested Vooch in crunch time when Chicago was looking to either tie this game up or bring it within a closer proximity, and then he missed a couple of shots because of Mark bothering him down there. So no, a point well received. This is all fun and games here. You can't allow the center to score 40 at the same time. Mark has been giving you a bunch of rebounds, and he's been giving you offensive production for this squad, which is huge.
But yeah, good win for the Hornets. I mean, overall, again, you're disappointed with the Brandon Miller situation. I think this team knows where it's heading in the standings, and it's not up, it's down. But to get positive contributions from your three best players, I mean, LaMelo, man, what's with the three-point shot, though? 1 of 9 from the field. I mean, he's able, how many does he score in this game? But
26.
He's still 26, but man, 1 of 9 from the field from 3. Is that three-point shot ever going to come back? But 9 assists in this game. That's great. Miles Bridges, 21 points. And then again, you get the good showcase from Nick Smith Jr. So there are positives to take away here. Even though, you get a 2-point win, that could have easily been a 2-point loss. I don't think the Hornets are going to be any danger for the rest of the way of being, out of that top 4 odds to get that number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, let's talk a little more about this and then Nick Richards' debut coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere!
Does it bother you at all that Nick Richards went for 20 and 10, his first game with a new team? We'll get to what our feelings are on Nick Richards in a Phoenix Suns uniform coming up next, LOH. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. Visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com, the FanDuel app. It's easy to navigate. The variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add something extra exciting to the playoffs. FanDuel has you covered. Again, visit FanDuel.com, join today, get started with $300 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Yeah, Doug, while we're combing through game logs, I did want to go through LaMelo because you mentioned the three-point shooting woes, and it is happening for him right now. That efficiency is starting to plummet from distance. He shot 11% in this game, going 1 of 9. He was 2 of 9 against Utah. He was 5 of 17, going all the way back to Houston on December 23rd. Doug, that's the last time that he shot above 32%. I mean, it's been a while. Injuries. So it's not like he's played every single game since that Houston matchup. Injuries have been a part of the equation, but even still, he's played in 6 games since that Houston matchup where he scored 45% from 3. Has not shot nearly at that mark since. But as we talk about his game maturing a little bit, got to the foul line, shot 13 free throws, made 11 of them, and if he goes 1 of 9 from distance, but he goes 7 of 19 from the field. What's the math on that? I hate doing it, but I think it's 6 of 8 from 2-point range. 6 of 8. Like, hell yeah. 6 of 8 is fantastic. Doug, even with him not hitting these threes, I view him as a bona fide shooter, so I expect those numbers to come back. And then when they come back, I think it's going to come back in a hurry. I think he's just going to have like 3-4 games where he just goes freaking bananas. If the 3-point shot it comes along like I think it will, and he's hitting from 2-point range at an improved rate, this is kind of what we want to see, buddy. Like, I'm actually, for some reason, I'm a little more excited about LaMelo and what he's showing us now, because I do expect the 3-point shooting to come back.
Well, and the big story from the Chicago game, close win, and a lot of that had to do with LaMelo getting to the free throw line when he absolutely needed to, getting the contact, getting the call, and then knocking down the free throw shots late in that game to keep Chicago at bay. Because, I mean, they had a significant lead. I think they were up 10 at one point, double digits in the fourth quarter before Chicago came back. And LaMelo essentially stiff-armed them with his drive, not with his three-point shot. He's just lost the dagger, but he hasn't he's lost the dagger, but he hasn't lost the ability to stab the opponent in the stomach. And so that's what he did to Chicago there.
Alrighty.
Well, it entered my head. It entered my head, and then I thought, should I say it? Then I laughed, and then I went ahead and said it.
Yeah,
that was the sequence of events that happened there. But looking at his game log from a points per shot attempt perspective on cleaning the glass, which is a good indicator of how efficient a player was, he hasn't, and this is to your point, he hasn't had back-to-back above average efficient games for his position. You'd have to go back to Thanksgiving, that period when he had the 50-point game against Milwaukee and then followed it up with a 44-point game against Orlando. He was 6 of 17 against Milwaukee from 3 and 4 of 11 against Orlando when he had the 44. But then Miami, that was not nearly as efficient, although he was able to get 32 points, and then he gets injured and is out until mid-December. And so he hasn't been able to put back-to-back games together since then. So we'll see. I just think it's something to monitor. I agree with you that he's been able to still impact winning which is impressive, because I don't think we could say the same thing about some of the previous periods of his career. It's like, man, if he's not hitting threes, it's a difficult time for LaMelo. And you've seen also his passing go up. His assist numbers have gone up pretty significantly since the beginning of this season. So, regardless of whether he should or not, he's trusting his teammates more. I think it's like overall net neutral for me for LaMelo right now until that three-point shot comes back.
So one thing I will point out, as we like to go to Cleaning the Glass, which is a website just to refresh people's memory. It's a website that measures stats, but it does not measure what happens in garbage time. So LaMelo, 41st percentile in shooting accuracy at the rim. It's a decent amount better than what he's ever done in his career. He's shooting 59% at the rim, according to Cleaning the Glass. That's up a few percentage points. He usually is in the 20th percentile among point guards. Here he is in the 41st. I think that trend is going up for him. Like, the closer you get to average, which is almost what we've asked from him, Doug, just being average there. So we're still a tick below, but he's improving. He keeps climbing the mountain. And by the way, one thing to mesh the first and third segment together, as we talk about how to watch the Hornets without Brandon Miller, you could see when Brandon Miller was in the lineup, when LaMelo came back from injury and those two were on the floor, LaMelo's usage actually came down a decent amount. You're talking about him with Luka levels of usage, like even more. Luka isn't even describing it. LaMelo was the highest usage player in the league without Brandon on the floor. With Brandon, with his guys back out there, he was like in the 80th percentile. So now with Brandon out against Chicago, guess what? He's right back in the mid 90s. He's going to climb that again. So expect a lot of usage for LaMelo going forward.
Yes, but you know what I haven't seen, and maybe that has something to do with it, that his usage went from 100th percentile to like 80th percentile. Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with that, though. What I haven't seen from LaMelo are the like weird frustration fouls. And I think his fouling in general has gotten a lot better since the beginning of the season. There have been a lot of under-the-hood improvements that you're not going to hear a lot of people talk about who don't watch this team closely. But he's made a lot of under-the-hood improvements that I would classify as like maturity improvements, game management improvements. And again, late game situations against Chicago. The Hornets have been horrible in the clutch this season. They were great against Chicago, and you have to lay that at the feet of LaMelo Ball.
I'm going to get mad. I'm going to get mad at national NBA writers all over again because what's going to happen is they're going to continue to look at that 3-point percentage where there was somewhat of a case that LaMelo's shot selection is so terrible that I don't want to put him in as a starter. Okay, fine, whatever, right? But now, as we see him improve, Doug, yet at least with the style in which he plays, as we see that improve, but the shot's not going in, people are going to go to Basketball Reference. They're going to see the 3-point shot not working for him, and they're going to say, terrible shot selection, shoots a bunch of threes, can't hit him, got to keep him out. It's like, no, that's not. But yes, okay, he's not hitting, but this is also a good thing, I think, for his career, for his trajectory, and yet you're using that against him. The man can't win. I think that's going to happen.
But they're also going to look at the fact that the Hornets have won 2 games here in a row, and LaMelo has shot 9 3-point attempts as opposed to the 11, 15, 17, 18, 20 that he has attempted in the previous stretch, all losses. So again, that to me, that signals, hey, LaMelo is like starting to get it. It's just unfortunately the makes aren't following with that.
Okay, Nick Richards, real quickly, in his debut with the Suns, he goes for over 20 and 10, Doug. It was quite the nice debut, 21 and 11 to be exact. He was 7 of 8 from the field. I did not watch this game, so I don't know exactly how he got those buckets. I don't know, what kind of music he was creating with the Devin Booker or Kevin Durant or anybody like that. But the stat line, it's a good one. How should we feel as Hornets fans watching him go for over 20 and 10?
Well, what you have to understand about Phoenix is they traded for Nick Richards because the rest of their centers were awful, including Mason Plumlee. And you got a good look at that, by the way. I mean, you got 2 straight games against Phoenix. Mm-hmm. You saw, like, Mason Plumlee was not an impact player. Iguodaro, like, every time Iguodaro was on the floor and touching the basketball, you were happy as a Hornets fan in those games. And so they needed a center, and as soon as that center showed up and Nick Richards, they were going to give that guy the ball a lot, and they did in that game. And Nick did a ton with it. He came off the bench in the game, but it still was able to score 21 and 11. So how should you feel as a Hornets fan? You should feel, I don't know, vindicated, I guess. I mean, I think we all knew this is what Nick Richards was capable of on a given night. I mean, he's done this for Charlotte. He did this for Charlotte. In that season where he had the breakout, he started with 2 of the 3 beginning of the season games. He went for 21 and then 19 in another. Like, he's capable of this, but he has weaknesses too, and those will expose themselves for Phoenix as well. And I think you take the good, you take the bad, and there you have Nick Richards kind of player. But he's going to be a starting center for the Phoenix Suns, and possibly, if Phoenix can figure this whole thing out, get some playoff run. And that's really where you're going to find out what Nick Richards is and isn't. And that's the whole story of the Charlotte Hornets in general, is that they have a lot of players on this roster that you have not been playoff tested. It makes them more difficult to trade. I think Nick Richards was an exception because he had a few breakout games. Phoenix was desperate for a center. There aren't a ton of available centers that are on his kind of contract, which is important for Phoenix, paying a lot of money to a lot of players. So he's unique, but the Hornets have a problem and will continue to have a problem of having guys that are not playoff tested and not being able to trade those players for significant value until they get to the postseason.
Yeah, and so Nick Richards, he did that with us a couple times. So when people are pointing out, of course, he goes for 20 and 10 with Phoenix, we should have held out longer for better return on Nick Richards. There's some confirmation bias working here. As soon as he has like 5 points and 4 rebounds, I don't think we're going to have to go back and then say, see, this is right. Like, you could just keep forcing whatever narrative you want to with every single performance that he gives you. The other thing is, it makes sense that Nick, working with more space, with more shooters such as Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, is going to be a better player. You would, of course, like that to happen here with Charlotte, but Mark is a better player consistently than Nick Richards. Like, there were times where Nick might have a better outing. There were times where maybe Nick would be playing over Mark. That did happen, but not consistently, not nearly consistently. You are going to trust Mark over Nick, so you're not going to trust Nurkic or Iguodaro or anybody else over there at the 5 spot in Phoenix. So it makes sense that Nick would would have this type of production with that team, and we'll see what he can do out there on the West Coast. But tip of the cap, man. Like, hey, good job. Keep doing it.
Yeah, Mark Stein, by the way, in his latest Steinline Substack, was sort of questioning if there's another move for Charlotte with the Okogie deal, because Okogie actually makes like $3.5 million more than Nick Richards. So there was some confusion there on Stein's part of like, why are they paying $3.5 million essentially for 2 second-round draft picks? And we famously on this show always do this where we're like, oh, this can't be the only move. It's got to be something else.
They're not done. It's not this show. No. I make fun of everybody else doing it. On Twitter, what people will do, they will quote tweet the original trade and say, oh, they're not done. But also, I made fun of myself for this. I am that person with this. Jeff Peterson and this team, they're not done. Like, it is true.
Well, it's true, but I don't think it's true in this instance. I could easily be proven wrong in moments. Like after taping, they could move Okogie for something else. That's definitely within the realm of possibility. But I think it can also be they wanted some second-round picks. Okogie became available. That the deadline for him to become available hit. They wanted to move Nick. Alarm bells were going off in Phoenix. They wanted to make a move. And this just happened to be, and they're okay with paying $3 million more because money is not really the issue for the Charlotte Hornets right now. It's getting the available assets to make a move at some other point. So I just disagree with Stein here. I don't think there's anything more to this, but we'll see.
Yeah, let me clarify. I don't think it's anything more specifically with Okogie that he's going to be sent out. I think there's going to be more that happens before the deadline with this team, such as Cody Martin getting traded, Vasa Micic being traded. I think the Hornets aren't done making moves before the deadline because this is selling. This is trading these guys that might help you win to collect assets. It's why you would spend maybe $3 million more for a couple second round picks because you're in asset collection mode. And Okogie fits the Hornets DNA. They even told you that. It makes sense to acquire that guy.
Yeah, I mean, that's cheap in my mind. I mean,
right.
I guess it's expensive relative to another team that was cash strapped and trying to compete. But if you're the Hornets, you should be taking on bad money for assets. So, yeah,
right.
Like 1-to-1, it's going to look silly to pay that much money for second-round picks. But, this is the Hornets situation. They're going to take on bad money, and they're probably not done doing that.
All right, they're not done. That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcast. That includes YouTube, Doug Branson, everyhornetsboxscore.com, Locked On NBA. Make sure you check them out. I'm Walker Mail. Listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Not today, if you do tune in to Wes and Walker. We are airing the Charlotte Hornets game, the MLK Day, the matinee game against the Dallas Mavericks, which is a tradition unlike any other. We can recap this game tomorrow, but by the time this episode releases, we're talking about like an hour's worth of consumption before the game tips. So, we'll recap it more. But MLK Day game, we've had some special moments. The fact that the Hornets tip off like around 1:12 every MLK Day. It's just one of the feel-good basketball moments that I have every year that is, I want to say manufactured in the sense of making something important here in the regular season. And this feels like a special game where we turn the volume up a little bit. So I'm excited about this one. I'll be there, and we'll be here to recap it all for you tomorrow on Locked On Hornets. Have a great rest of your day.